Thomas Montgomery seemed perfectly ordinary. He was a 46-year-old factory worker, a husband, a father to 2 daughters. He lived in a quiet suburban home. His days were filled with the predictable rhythm of a middle-aged man's life. He went to work, he came home. He appeared to be just another face in the crowd, someone you wouldn't look at twice. But behind this mask of normalcy, another person was stirring. A person who was younger, stronger, and far more exciting. A person who existed only in the glowing pixels of a computer screen. This was a man deeply unhappy with his reality, seeking an escape. The internet became his sanctuary. It was a place where he could shed his skin. He could leave behind the weight of his age and his responsibilities. Online, he wasn't Thomas Montgomery, the factory worker from New York. He was someone else entirely. He was Marine Sniper. He was 18 years old, a brave Marine, handsome and heroic, ready for deployment to Iraq. This wasn't just a simple lie, it was a complete reinvention. He carefully crafted this new identity piece by piece, borrowing photos of a younger man to make his story believable. He was building a new life, one keystroke at a time. The real world faded. The digital world became his truth. This double life was a dangerous game. It required constant attention and a web of intricate lies. At home, he was a distant husband, his mind elsewhere. Online, he was a charismatic young soldier full of passion and promises. The line between these two worlds began to blur for him. He started to feel more like the Marine than the middle-aged father. The thrill of the deception was powerful. It fed a part of him that had been dormant for years. He was no longer invisible. He was admired. He was wanted. And this feeling was addictive, a potent drug that pulled him deeper into his own fantasy. The psychology behind such a detailed fabrication is complex. It often stems from profound loneliness and a sense of inadequacy. For Thomas, the Marine Sniper persona was everything he was not. It represented youth, valor, and a future full of possibilities. His real life felt like a dead end. The online world offered an infinite horizon. He wasn't just pretending. In his mind, he was living a more authentic life through his avatar. He was escaping the person he had become by creating someone he wished he could be. This deep-seated need for an alternate reality would soon have devastating consequences for everyone involved. In the vast anonymous landscape of online chat rooms, Marine Sniper found Jessie. Her screen name was Talhot Blonde. She claimed to be an 18-year-old girl from West Virginia. She was beautiful, witty, and seemed to understand him completely. Their connection was immediate and intense. They spent hours messaging each other, sharing their deepest secrets and dreams. For Thomas, this was not just a flirtation. It was a profound emotional bond. He fell deeply in love with the words on the screen, with the idea of this perfect girl who saw him as her hero. She was the missing piece in his fabricated life. Their relationship blossomed entirely through text. They never spoke on the phone. They never saw each other on a webcam. Yet, their bond felt more real to Thomas than his own marriage. Jessie sent him photos of a stunning blonde teenager. He, in turn, sent her pictures of the young man he pretended to be. They built a shared world of fantasy, a digital bubble where they were two young lovers destined to be together. He promised to come for her when he returned from his tour of duty. She promised she would wait. It was a perfect romance, shielded from the harsh imperfections of the real world. The intensity of their online affair was fueled by the anonymity it provided. They could be their most idealized selves. There were no awkward silences, no physical flaws, no real-world complications. Thomas poured all his emotions into Marine Sniper. The character became his vessel for love and passion. He was living a teenage romance from the body of a middle-aged man. The lines between Thomas Montgomery and Marine Sniper were dissolving. He was obsessed. His entire emotional world now revolved around maintaining this connection with Jessie, a person he had never met, but felt he knew better than anyone. This digital love story, however, was built on a foundation of lies. Both parties were hiding behind carefully constructed facades. Thomas was not a young Marine. He was a married man in his 40s. The fantasy was intoxicating, but it was also incredibly fragile. It existed only as long as the truth remained buried. The emotional stakes were dangerously high. He had invested his entire sense of self-worth into this relationship. Any threat to this perfect digital love would not just be a disappointment, it would be an attack on the very core of his new identity. The perfect digital world Thomas had built was about to be invaded. Another man entered the chat room. His name was Brian Barrett. He was 22 years old. Unlike Thomas, Brian was real. He was a co-worker of Thomas's at the same factory. He was young, single, and genuinely interested in Jessie. Brian, using his own name and identity, began chatting with her. He too became smitten with the witty and beautiful girl from West Virginia. A love triangle was formed, but it was a strange one. Two of the points existed only as digital ghosts, while the third was a real person caught in the middle. Thomas was consumed by jealousy. He saw Brian as a real-life rival for Jessie's affection. In his mind, Brian was trying to steal his girlfriend. The fact that Jessie was an online persona and his own identity was a lie did not matter. The emotions were real, the rage was real. He watched from the sidelines as Brian and Jessie flirted. He read their public messages. The fantasy he had so carefully constructed was cracking. Brian was a threat not just to his online relationship, but to his entire sense of self as Marine Sniper. The heroic Marine was now a jealous, spurned lover. The conflict escalated within the chat room. Marine Sniper became aggressive and territorial. He warned Brian to stay away from Jessie. He made threats. The online drama mirrored a high school feud, but it was being orchestrated by a man in his late 40s. Thomas used his Marine Sniper persona to intimidate his younger co-worker. He spoke of his military training and his skills as a sniper. The fantasy was no longer an escape, it had become a weapon. He was using his fictional strength to fight a real-world battle for a fictional prize. Brian Barrett was confused but persistent. He didn't understand the depth of the older man's obsession. To him it was just an online flirtation. He had no idea that his rival, Marine Sniper, was the man he worked alongside every day. He couldn't have known that Thomas Montgomery was watching his every move, both online and in the factory. The digital world and the real world were colliding with terrifying force. The love triangle was no longer a game. It was a pressure cooker, and the tension was about to reach its breaking point in the most violent way imaginable. The jealousy festered inside Thomas Montgomery until it became, unbearable. He believed that Brian Barrett was going to meet Jessie in person. The thought of his real-world rival meeting his fantasy lover was just too much to handle. It would shatter the illusion completely. It would prove that he, Thomas, was powerless. The Marine Sniper persona, built on a fantasy of strength and control, could not allow this to happen. The line between protecting a fantasy and committing a real-world crime vanished. Thomas decided that Brian had to be eliminated. The digital threat, well, it required a physical solution. On the evening of September 15, 2006, the fantasy spilled into reality with horrific consequences. Thomas Montgomery waited for Brian Barrett in the parking lot of their factory. He was no longer Marine Sniper, the heroic soldier. He was a 46-year-old man armed with a .30 caliber rifle, the kind a real sniper might use. When Brian emerged from the factory after his shift, Thomas confronted him. This was not a chat room argument, this was a real-life execution. He shot his young co-worker multiple times, ending his life over a woman who did not exist. The murder of Brian Barrett was a shocking and brutal act. It was the tragic endpoint of a long and twisted journey of deception. A young man with his whole life ahead of him was dead. He was killed because he had unknowingly stumbled into another man's elaborate and fragile fantasy. Brian's only crime was being real. He was a real suitor for a fake girl, and he paid the ultimate price for it. The news sent shockwaves through the community. How could a workplace rivalry over an online girl lead to murder? The answer was far more complicated than anyone could have imagined. Thomas was arrested quickly. The evidence was overwhelming. He confessed to the crime, claiming it was a dispute over a woman. But the story was far from over. The investigation delved into the online world that had fueled his rage. The police needed to find Jessie, the Talhot blonde at the center of this deadly triangle. They needed to understand her role in this tragedy. They assumed she was a young, innocent girl caught in the crossfire. They were wrong. The biggest shock of the case was yet to be revealed, waiting behind another anonymous screen name. As investigators dug into the digital life of Talhot Blonde, they made a startling discovery. The beautiful 18-year-old Jessie was not who she claimed to be. There was no teenage girl from West Virginia. The photos were stolen from the social media profile of a real high school student named Jessie. The person behind the screen name was someone else entirely. The architect of this persona, the one who had fanned the flames of jealousy between Thomas and Brian, was a woman named Mary Sheeler, and she was not a teenager. She was a 45-year-old mother from a nearby town. The truth was, honestly, stranger than fiction. Mary Sheeler was the mother of the real Jesse. She had created the Talhot blonde profile using her own daughter's pictures and identity. She had been the one chatting with both Marine Sniper and Brian Barrett. She was playing a twisted game of her own, manipulating two men at once. She reveled in the attention and the drama. When she realized that Marine Sniper was actually Thomas Montgomery, a man she knew from her past, the deception only deepened. She continued to play the part of the young girl, pitting the two men against each other. Mary's role was that of a puppet master. She knew both men were falling for her fabricated character. She encouraged their rivalry. She would tell Thomas that Brian was bothering her, then turn around and flirt with Brian. She fed Thomas's paranoia and jealousy, fully aware that he was an older married man becoming dangerously obsessed. She held all the power because she was the only one who knew the truth. Her anonymity gave her a license to be cruel and reckless, without any thought for the real-world pain she was causing. It was a catastrophic abuse of the anonymity the internet provides. The final revelation was a chilling lesson on the dangers of digital deception. Thomas Montgomery went to prison for murder, his life destroyed by a fantasy. Brian Barrett was dead, a victim of a lie. And Mary Sheeler, the woman who orchestrated the entire charade from behind her keyboard, faced lesser charges for her role. The case of the chatroom killer serves as a haunting reminder that the people we meet online may not be who they seem. It shows how loneliness and insecurity can twist into obsession and violence, and it proves that behind the screen, hidden behind a facade, the capacity for deception can be, well, limitless and ultimately lethal.